Quality time could be going to a movie together or sitting down at a coffee house together and spending that time. But this shared experience is more, let's go on a hike together. Let's go skydiving together.
Oh no.
Jen's out.
No, we're not going skydiving together. I want to put that out there early and often, okay? We're not going skydiving.
But that's the difference. So for those of
You may be one choice away from a thriving marriage. Welcome to the Operation Thriving Marriage podcast with Brian and Jennifer Harvey.
All right, welcome back to the Operation Thriving Marriage podcast. I'm Jennifer Harvey. My husband Brian Harvey is here with me, and we're so excited about this episode that we're going to be sharing with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us again. And, if you've enjoyed this podcast, it really helps us if you would just take a moment right now and review or rate the podcast, whatever podcast service you're doing. If you found this valuable, that really does help us get the word out so other people can find us and learn about Operation Thriving Marriage as well. So if you take a moment and do that, we'd appreciate that. When we first got married on our honeymoon on the cruise, we read the book by Gary Chapman, The 5 Love Languages.
Yeah, great book, and it's kind of been a staple, I think, in a lot of church libraries since that time, just talking about what these different love languages are, and you hear a lot of pastors mention this in sermons, too.
Yeah, it's so ubiquitous now. I think if they don't know Gary Chapman's list of the love language, if they've at least heard of the idea of love language, right? And the idea of understanding your spouse and how they communicate love and how they receive love, and the importance as a couple of knowing that in each other and focusing on translating your love into the language that they're going to understand. And we've talked about that on the podcast before, and we've talked about that. We often will share concepts of that when we're doing the live experiences as well. It's a very normal thing to talk about. If you don't remember, Gary Chapman's 5 love languages are words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch. And when we first read the book, though, sweetheart, I remember conversations about it, well, I want all of these. It's not like any of these are like, well, if you never touched me, I'd be okay. Or if you never gave me a gift, I'd be okay. And so for a long time, we had a lot of conversations about you just kind of wrestling through and even doing some of the assessments and stuff, and then feeling like the assessment didn't really describe you as well. You often, early in our marriage, it's like, well, I don't know what love language. Kind of, where are your thoughts at on that now for the audience?
Yeah, I think that for me personally, as well as others, I think, definitely utilizing all 5 of these is a wise thing to do. But if people are able to pinpoint, more specifics like 2 or 3, or maybe there's just an overarching number 1, I think that can just be helpful, because being able to communicate to your spouse in their love language is always going to be just a boon to the marriage. And then you too, kind of extra credit above and beyond being able to receive love in your spouse's love language. That's really fantastic as well. Just sets the marriage up to succeed.
And we've talked about that a lot, about not just translating your love to your spouse, but also translating the love you're getting from your spouse, where, acts of service may not be your love language. That may not mean as much to you, but when your spouse, who their love language is acts of service, is doing that, you need to translate that into, oh, the dishes were done. That means I love you.
Right. Exactly.
And things like that. It's interesting because we've met a lot of people, though, that feel similarly to the way you've talked about, where it's just like, I don't really identify with any of these love languages. I don't know which love language is mine. I don't know how I should interact with even this whole concept.
And it can be very frustrating too, because it's just like, well, goodness, I don't know how to communicate to my spouse about love language, and then, wouldn't know how to communicate love to the spouse because the spouse can't communicate their love language. And it can just really feel like that's kind of a moving target, and of course, expressing and receiving love, it's not just codified by Gary Chapman's book in these 5 love languages, but it can just be difficult in just trying to say, how do I utilize this tool to the best of my ability?
Yeah, when you can't identify that, and that was something that you and I talked about a lot early on in our marriage, because for me, I knew right away, read the book. I mean, physical touch. I mean, I grew up in a household that was hugging and all that stuff. It was that for me has always been kind of the number one.
And that's like number 5 for me.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, please don't.
Right. And so working through that was tricky, even because I'm like, I want to hug you. I want to hold your hand. I want to kiss you and stuff. And you're like, okay, this is a bit much, but you learned, obviously. And I learned to back also. But what I wanted
I know what I was going to say is like top tip here for it's like, do not touch me within an hour of me waking up. That's just dangerous for all parties involved.
And I break that rule, and that's why I'm missing 2 fingers. Just kidding. If you've never met me, I have all my fingers.
We need to post video to show that you have all your fingers, by the way.
Video proof that
right.
was just a joke.
That's right.
But it's frustrating for both people in the marriage. It's frustrating for the person that can't identify a love language, because it's like, I want to tell you how to love me, but I don't know how. If they're familiar with the concept. I mean, some people never heard of the concept, then it's not an issue. But for those, it's like, I'm frustrated because I don't know how to tell you to love me. And then it's also frustrating, like you said, for the other spouse. Like, I want to tell you I love you in a way that you understand.
And it connects.
Yeah, and it connects. Yeah. And it's not, and it's like, again, telling I love you. I mean, we're using this metaphor that Gary Chapman has developed, because obviously saying I love you is important. You should say that often, but communicating love in other ways is important. eHarmony did some research a while back, and what was interesting in the eHarmony research is that half of the respondents didn't feel like 5 love languages was enough. Felt like they needed more than 5 love languages because those didn't define who they were.
And there's 2 new love languages that are out now. And again, they're not new, right? In the sense of, that's not how, it's just that they weren't stated by Gary Chapman. And I've heard the argument that these can be folded maybe into the 5, but I think this was a good one that they put out there. So they are shared experiences and emotional security. So when we're talking about shared experiences, that's why the argument could be made it's that it sounds like it's quality time, but it's actually something that's different than that. This talks more about you're sharing some adventures together and you're stretching yourself as to that.
The way I see this, the difference would be quality time could be going to a movie together or sitting down at a coffee house together and spending that time. But this shared experience is more, let's go on a hike together. Let's go skydiving together.
Oh no.
Jen's out.
No, we're not going skydiving together. I want to put that out there early and often, okay? We're not going skydiving.
But that's the difference. So for those of you that's like, you've thought quality time was your love language, but then the coffee house or the movie or sitting in the garden was not doing that. But then when you went on a hike, when you went on a vacation, when you did something that was out of the norm, again, stretching yourself, working out. Todd and Bev like to do races and stuff, and they don't do them together at the same time, but that's something that they both enjoy. So if that's your love language, like, oh, I want to go do these mud runs. I mean, the Tough Mudder, that's what they're called, the Tough Mudder or an Ironman or something like that.
Wait, what'd you call me?
These tough experiences that stretch you and grow you, and you feel closer together because of that experience. That would be a shared experiences love language.
So I think that with some of this, we kind of talked about the idea of this might be your love language if. All right. Do you enjoy planning a weekend, a trip, or some sort of an activity with your partner? And this could be classes, right? You guys might be taking a class. You might be singing in a choir together. There might be, just these different shared things that you do. And you're the adventurer. You're always seeking out new things that you could do together. We were watching a TV show the other day, and it was like, one person in the couple was just like, oh my goodness, let's try this restaurant. We're going to go to this really, goofy, it's really cold in there, and there's ice sculptures.
bar.
and it's the ice bar or whatever.
That I'll never understand is the ice bars.
We're going to we're going for this like art hike or art walk where we're seeing all of this art, those kinds of things. You'd prefer to get out of the house for a date night rather than stay in. You want to have all of the experiences and do all the things. Another one is your favorite memories with your partner might involve some different things that you have experienced together. And also, you seek out people who are adventurous or not afraid to try something that would be new.
So that's one of the new love languages that was identified by eHarmony. The other one is emotional security.
Mm-hmm.
So according to eHarmony, this is the idea of feeling emotionally seen or cared for emotionally. People with this love language, they want to feel seen, they want to feel safe, and they want to feel listened to. And so it's in a lot of ways people would say, okay, again, quality time, but it's not about just being together. It's about that safety that's created when you're together and knowing that I'm loved and cared for.
And this might be your love language if. All right. So this is if you're not afraid of deep conversations. And I really enjoy having deep conversations with you and also with close friends of mine, as you well know. And a lot of things too is, are you asking a lot of questions to get to that root cause of situations that have happened or feelings that you've had or experiences that you've had within that situation.
It could be even you're not satisfied with the small talk. It's like, this conversation, it wasn't a good conversation because all we did was talk about the weather, which is a lot of what we do here in the Midwest, by the way. But
well, I mean, what can I say? Our Midwestern weather is very emotionally turbulent, at least for the weather, at least for the weather, right? Another thing that I would say about this more emotional security love language is, do friends call you to talk through issues or feelings because they're feeling safe with you? And if that's the case, that might be something that you have a really good hold on and grasp of, that you're able to utilize that love language for others. And are you often asking your partner how they're really feeling about the situation? And I think that takes a lot of intuition to be able to do, where it's like you're getting feedback from your partner. You're talking about how the partner is experiencing things, but it's like, did we really get to the heart of that? Is that really how you're feeling? Is there something behind that? Is there just kind of something more as far as that connection? And then also you enjoy that connection that's formed by being able to be vulnerable with someone else. And I would say that this kind of a thing, it's not for the faint of heart, and this is not something that you'd be able to experience with everybody.
Well, and that's true, and that's one of the things, though, identifying your love language. Sometimes, I mean, it doesn't matter what love language. Sometimes a friendship or a relationship where there is love, not romantic love, but love nonetheless, not all love languages are appropriate at all times.
Right.
Most people need all of the love languages. When we look at that list, and then even the two new ones, quote unquote, added by eHarmony, it's not like I don't want any of those things.
Right. It's like we don't want to breadcrumb any of them. It's like we want to be giving those to our partners, even if our partners have their favorites, and even if, we have our other favorites.
And that's a big thing I think is really important. Many people will get target fixated on one or two, and this is my love language, or, hey, I've identified my spouse's love language, and I'm going to just blitz them with physical touch or with gifts or whatever it is. But if you neglect the other love languages, there could still be a problem, because your spouse and you still need all of them, but there's probably one or two that they need the most, that speak the loudest to them.
Mm-hmm. So it's like we want all the love languages up in here, but we really want to make it rain for certain ones. And I think too, sometimes these love languages might even change over time. So I think that that's something to be open to, and make sure you're talking through these things. I would say, especially if we're talking about longer term marriages, just as people grow and change, there could be some changes in there, and you got to be able to flex and flow with Jesus on that to show that love.
Yeah, and maybe 7 love languages still isn't enough. I mean, there's another book I've heard of, I haven't read, that identified like 9 love languages. And I don't know the name of the book. So, I mean, feel free to comment on the podcast, send us a message. I probably should have looked that up before I came into the studio, but I didn't think about it till just now. But there's other collections, other ways this is communicated. But if you still can't identify your love language, if you still can't say, this is how I most want to receive, and this is how I most often communicate love, that's okay.
Yeah, no condemnation here, friends. You know, we're going to do what we can do to help you out with this.
Yeah. Don't feel bad.
Right, because really the most important thing is being able to communicate to your spouse the things that make you feel loved, and it's not just about having the right label from, you know, a book that was written, whether by Gary Chapman or someone else. It's like, how do you communicate to your spouse how you receive love, and also how you're expressing love, and how can you be complimentary with your spouse just as to that, so everybody's feeling loved.
Exactly, and labels are helpful because I can identify this, I can now describe it, but they're not necessary. You don't have to have the right label to know what your love language is, or how, and even you can get away from the idea of even using love language, just this is how I love, or this is how I am loved. That's okay. Don't worry about getting tied up in such things. But here's something, if you're still struggling with this and you can't identify it and you just don't know how to communicate how you want to be loved by your spouse, think about a time when you felt particularly loved.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So some of that is, when did that happen? And then where were you when that happened? What were you doing? And who were you with? Some of that I think has to do with, sometimes people are they feeling seen?
Yes.
And just kind of to elaborate on that.
Well, yeah, just feelings, or just it's those moments where all the stars seem to align type things. Like, I feel not just seen and acknowledged, but appreciated. I feel like not only do you know me and see me, but you value me, and I'm important to you. And ideally this time would be with your spouse, but especially for newlyweds, maybe the time you felt most loved wasn't with your spouse. And especially for newlyweds, this doesn't mean there's something wrong with the marriage. It means there have been times in your life when you've been particularly loved, and that's okay. You know, because this isn't just romantic, intimate, passionate love. This is love in all its forms. I mean, obviously, God loves us infinitely and in crazy ways. And if you're newlyweds, maybe the time you felt most loved hasn't been during this time you've been with your current spouse. It was as a child with your parents.
Oh, sure. And this could be, you might have had a friend who really saw you and appreciated you, and just kind of the right timing, the right thing that happened, just an experience of appreciation, or a surprise party or something. This could be your church family having done something for you. Maybe if you were being sent off as a missionary, or even something, else, maybe an engagement party. It could have been a birthday party, something along those lines. And even this might be somebody that you dated before you met your spouse. And if that's the case, don't feel bad about it, because you and your spouse have the rest of your lives together to really build into that. But just your spouse knowing how you experience that love, that appreciation, and just kind of put that on just the highest level that it could go to for you. And maybe even your spouse saying, I want to break that glass ceiling for you to be seen and valued and appreciated in that moment. That's a really fantastic thing.
And if that's how you feel, that doesn't mean you've married the wrong person either. Sometimes people will get into this cycle, and it's like, oh, I'm not experiencing this, and I experienced something special with this other person. You broke up with that other person for a reason.
Oh, sure.
You didn't marry them for a reason. That doesn't mean that at one point or at several points during their relationship, because you were dating them for a reason too.
Sure.
That doesn't mean that there couldn't have been a period of time when you were with them that they communicated love in a great way. That doesn't mean that they loved you the way your spouse truly loves you. That doesn't mean you love them the way you love your spouse. It means in a point of time, they were able to communicate love in a way that is helpful. So that's okay.
And the other thing I wanted to do is really a shout out to people who are happily married the second time, because we work a lot with people who have been married and then they were widowed and then they might marry somebody else, and you just haven't had that experience with that second spouse yet. And again, appreciate that second marriage for what it is. And I just hate that comparison to happen, because I don't want that second marriage to be wrecked.
And we hope you've been loved by people other than your spouse too.
No doubt.
It's different.
Yeah.
The love between spouses is unique and special and vital and important and should be held to a different level. But that doesn't mean no one else ever loved you.
Well, sure. And like you've said, Brian, I mean, it's all okay. It's really about learning how you communicate love and how you receive, how you've received that love.
And so the other thing is, when was this? Where was this? Who was this? And what was going on at the time? This kind of goes back to, okay, were you out on a hike together? Were you having a cup of coffee? Were you watching a movie? Whatever it is, those are some of the things that are going to help you identify those things that you receive love while you hear love, and identifying things that are similar in all situations in which you felt loved. So you think about that. When have I especially felt loved? And what is the common thread through all of those? I can tell you, our audience here, for me growing up, one of the times when I felt especially loved and safe and all that stuff was when I was getting a hug from my dad. That's an indication for me that my love language is physical touch. It was,
sure.
Even as a teenager, when something was special, something happened to me, the first thing I would do is go run and give my dad a hug. And even as it's like, okay, that's not cool to hug your dad. For me, I needed that, and I needed to hug my dad and be hugged by my dad. Jen knows, even though physical touch is not her, it may now be her number 7th love language, now that there's 7 instead of 5.
Oh, goodness. Oh, boy.
But Jen knows, hey, when I'm feeling bad or when I'm feeling really good, or there's just basically there's not a time when I don't need a hug. Mm-hmm. So that's just how it is. So identifying what's that common thread in those places that you felt loved, and communicate that. Just say, hey, you don't have to say, hey, my love language is physical touch. Like, hey, I really, really appreciate when you give me a small gift when you've come back from a trip, or when you give me this or that, or I really, really appreciate when you hug me, or those types of things, and communicate to your spouse so that they know how to show you the love that they feel inside for you.
Absolutely. And, we had alluded a little bit earlier that these love languages can change. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying brace for impact, but I mean, the reality of just people can change over time, and what their preferences are can change over time. Don't feel like because your spouse was saying physical touch, this is my thing, year one of marriage, that's necessarily going to be the case as time goes on. And I'm sorry, Brian, I haven't changed over to that. I'm not really sorry. It's just that we're different.
She's not sorry. And that's
no,
okay.
It's fine. It's totally fine, because I think the stats that we've got are 26% of the people in that eHarmony study said that they have changed the way they express love over the past year. And 25% of the people in the eHarmony study said that they have changed the way they prefer to receive love. And, I know that we had talked to a pastor pretty recently who had said, okay, when my wife and I were first married, it was the quality time. Now she wants all the gifts up in here. So it's like the most expensive love language now has taken over. We're not getting into all of the specifics and logistics of these 5 or these now 7 love languages, but it's about that kind of communication. And it doesn't mean you've got, if your wife's gift, a love language is gifts, you don't have to like buy her all of the things up in there, but just using the principles in that. Sometimes for that, the gift is going to be a candy bar. Quality time doesn't need to be you're spending an entire day with someone necessarily, but just really be invested in the time that you have with that person.
And it's interesting with these stats that the way the question or the research was worded when I was reading it, was in the past year, 26%, 25%. So it was a recent change. So that seems to indicate to me that this can change frequently. That's okay. Now for me, physical touch hasn't changed. That's still for me, but certainly I've learned to value different things at different times in our marriage. But what I want to communicate is, one, if you don't think you've got your spouse's love language locked in and you never have to talk about this again.
Exactly.
You need to continue to grow and experience. And if you notice that they do not seem to be feeling loved the way they used to, you need to have that conversation. You need to talk about that. And don't feel bad if what was communicating love at 100% a year, 6 months ago, 6 years ago is not communicating love to you right now. You're not broken. You didn't forget how you're changing and developing as a human being, which is healthy and good and normal. And just be honest with your spouse, like, hey, I know that was the thing when we got married, but really now this is what really helps me. When I really feel special to you, it's when this is happening, when you're taking me out to coffee, when we're just sitting holding hands watching whatever random streaming service, because there's 18 million of them now. That's really the thing that is special to me now, even though it wasn't so special before.
You know what they didn't put as a love language in this thing?
Netflix and chill?
No, a coffee. Because I'm just like, if Brian brings me coffee, is that a gift? Is that an act of service? Is that quality time that we're going to spend together? I don't know.
Terrifying.
But it's coffee.
No, it's terrifying because I don't know if I'm going to get it right. So I need to just stay out of the way and let you and Jesus kind of have that time in the morning with your coffee before it's safe.
And I think just the other thing I wanted to say is, guys, if you see me at a conference, I'm hugging everybody up in there. So I think some of it is just appropriateness, and when you're at certain spots about expressing love and attention to folks. I don't want anybody to think that I'm in any way chilly or giving anybody the cold shoulder, because
we're Midwesterners. We hug everybody.
Would love to give you a hug when I see you at a conference. Do it.
But that's not your love language.
Sure, but
it's how Midwesterners greet each other.
Yes,
it's just it's the Midwestern handshake. We just handshake.
It's kind.
With
it's affectionate.
2 arms.
That's exactly it. That's exactly it. But I really think that experiencing and expressing love, that's just that important part of being a human being, created in God's image, that imago Dei. I think I pronounced that right. There we go. Imago Dei in Latin. Thank you very much. God created us to experience his love and also express love back to him. And he created us to experience and express love in our earthly relationships. In no relationship other than marriage is this seen more fully. It's not important how you label this, Gary Chapman or otherwise. It's not important if you can identify the right language, 5, 7, or coffee. What is important is both of you tell each other what communicates love best for you, and then spend the rest of your lives together trying to outdo each other in expressions of love that most fully communicates love.
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Operation Thriving Marriage podcast. You can find us on Facebook, on X, formerly Twitter. You can find us at our website, operationthrivingmarriage.com. And we would love to come out to your church or your event and share a little bit of this and learn more about marriage with you together. And you can reach out to us on all the socials or on the website for more information. Thank you so much.
Jen and I started Operation Thriving Marriage to help couples and churches take marriages from merely surviving to thriving. We've got our book, we've got a blog, and resources for our coaching ministry, and you can bring us out for an Operation Thriving Marriage experience. For more information, go to operationthrivingmarriage.com. That's operationthrivingmarriage.com.